All right, welcome back. I hope you got a good break. Welcome to day one, topic number 2, where we're going to talk about installing Python. Let's get back to our schedule here and notice that we're going to install Python and set up our development environment. So get ourselves ready to start writing code. Go over to our Jupyter Lab, kind of see what we're doing here. We're going to do this in 3 different phases. 1, we're going to install Python. 2, we're going to install an integrated development environment. That's what IDE stands for. There's 3 to choose from. JetBrains, which is a company that produces one called PyCharm. There's one called VS Code, which is Microsoft's cross-platform open source text editor that also lets you do develop obviously code, right? And the last one is the full-featured Visual Studio. This is Microsoft's product that is for all different programming languages, not just Python. And then last, we'll talk about a Python tool suite called Anaconda. And Anaconda has a bunch of tools, including the Jupyter Lab install that you see me running here. So with these 3 things, we should have enough infrastructure on your computer to be able to really write code efficiently and effectively. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install Python for the Windows. If you have Mac or a Linux operating system, you can still install it as well, but this really, I'm intending you to be able to install this on a Windows computer. So if you're on a different operating system, your mileage may vary. We're going to visit the Python website. In fact, I'll go there now. python.org. And this is the Python website. It changes from time to time, but not very much, right? It's a pretty static look and feel. The actual content does change. It's got Python, PSF, documentations, PyPy, jobs, and community. We're going to focus mainly on the Python portion of it, and we're going to go to the downloads section. So from the downloads section, you can see I can just click for Windows. There's one called 3.11.4, and I can go ahead and click that to start downloading it. And it starts to run there. Good, got it. If you have a Mac, you can click on the Mac, and it should take you to releases for the Mac operating system. Or if you have other platforms, such as Linux, I think you're going to find, or iOS, iPads, Solaris, where's virtual machines? Here we go. We can also have one for Linux. So lots of different downloads, but for you, if you're on Windows, the only one you need is this one right here. Download for Windows, Python 3.11.4. When you watch this video, it might be a newer version. Really anything above 3.6 should work just fine for this class. I've installed 3.11, got it downloaded there. That's my choice of operating system or versions, right? It's the 3.11. If your time and it's newer version, go ahead and grab the latest version of Python. So we visited the website, we went ahead and downloaded the installer. You see it down there. Go ahead and run the installer. It's straightforward, right? You might click a nuanced thing or here or there, but for most part, it's just click next, next, next. You might want to change where it's installing to, what directory, that kind of stuff. But there's no real complications when installing it, except for when you want to add it to your path. The path variable is really important for running code. Let me show you what path is, just so you're never familiar with the term path. We'll type in path here. And you'll see it comes up with a thing called edit the system environment variables. Path is a system environment variable, and you can find it under your system properties, under the advanced tab, in environment variables. And here's all your different variables that are set up in your environment, and one of them should be path. And if I edit that one, you can see all the parameters that are set in my path. So these are the different folders that are going to be checked whenever I run an application to find if that application exists. You'll notice I have one here for Python 3.11 or 3.11. That is the folder. If I copy this folder, we'll get Control A, Control C. If I go to that in my File Explorer windows, you'll notice that python.exe is in that directory. That's going to be an important thing here in a second. What path lets us do, if I open up a command prompt, and I type a command right in here, any command that I type, it's going to start with the path and says, is that command found in this first directory of my path? Right, it's going to say, is it found in C users, Jonathan, app data, local program, Python, Python 3 scripts? And if it's not, then it goes to the next one. And it just keeps going down the list until it finds the executable that you're looking for. If it gets to the end of the list and doesn't find it, it gives you an error. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Right? If I just type something that's definitely not a command and hit enter, it says, hey, this is not recognized as an internal or external command. But if I type Python, and then I can pass in the parameters, -- version, it's going to go down that list, and in that second folder that we showed in the path, it found python.exe. So it ran that version and said, hey, that is version 3.11.4. That happens to be the version we just downloaded. Right? Let me go to my downloads just to show you that as well. So if I go here and go to my downloads, you can see that I downloaded it right here. All you got to do is double click it. It's a self-extracting exe file that'll do the install for you. I just did that previously. Okay, so I wanted to show you why setting the path and variable is so important, right? You want to make sure that you hit the add to path. All right, once that's done, you can go ahead and complete the installation. Click next, click finish. If it asks to do a reboot, go ahead and reboot your system. Just make sure you remember where you're at in the video. Then we can verify the install, just like I did. Open up a command prompt. We'll hit the little Windows icon. We'll type 3 little letters, C, M, and D for command. And that brings us up our command prompt. I click that. And we'll type in Python -- version. What is it doing when I type this? Where does it find, how does it know which version of Python to run? Right, hopefully you remember that. That is found in our path variable. In our path, it'll go sequentially down the list from top to bottom until it finds python.exe in one of those folders, and then it'll run that particular version. So you can see I have version 3.11.4 there. And I'm going to go off script. I haven't done this before, but I think it's worthwhile. Let's go see if I can find another version of Python on my system here, because I've installed several versions. I've got version 3.10. Let's open that file location. And you'll see I've got a different directory that has Python 3.10 in it. And actually, let's go to the properties of this, because this is a shortcut. It's going to show me where it's actually located. Copy that, and let's go to that directory instead. All right, so now you'll see that I have Python in here. If I open up a command prompt directly from this folder, and I type version, oops, did I not do that right? There we go. It's version 3.10.4. What if I put this in my path? I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to our path variable. Did I keep it up in there? No, that's not it. Remember, we type the word path, we get the system properties, go to environment and variables, and double click our path, and let's add a new one here. Let's put that in. Now it's at the bottom, which means that it's going to be the last thing that's going to be checked. Let's move it all the way up. Okay, I'm going to save that. Hit OK. Close out of all these windows. Let's go back into our command prompt now. And now let's type in Python -- version. Oops, keep hitting the equal sign, -- There we go. Because the path checked and found it in that first folder, it's actually going to execute the 3.10.4 version of Python versus my 3.11.4. So let me go, because I don't want to do that. Let's go back into our path and actually remove that variable. And I'll take this one out, and I'll just go ahead and delete that one. Okay. So if you messed up your path, that's how you would get into it to edit it. Now, I think it stays in memory. So you'll notice that it doesn't change just because I got to close this out and relaunch a command prompt. And now if I type in Python -- version, you'll see I get back to that 3.11.4. So that path is controlling which version of Python we're actually going to run. The next thing I want to talk about with Python, right out of the box, if you just download and install Python, it's going to come with a couple other utilities that I want to address. The first one is idle. You'll notice there's one for 3.11. Every version that I've got installed on my system, 3.6, 3.10, all have an idle application. Idle, what it is it's a very rudimentary tool that we can use to write Python code. In fact, it brings us in, you'll see it's a Python shell where I can just write code. Print our hello world. And then as soon as I hit enter, it executes that line of code. And now I can do my entire programming, I could actually write inside idle. And if I might make something that's like an error, let's like just type in gobbledygook, it's going to tell me that there's an error, right? Syntax. And it'll keep me honest and make me only be able to write Python code, but I can actually test it right here inside idle. So right out of the bat, when you install Python, you have all the tools you need to really write Python programs. But it's a little hard to write Python programs in idle, so we're going to get some more functionality. We're going to install PyCharm. That's the next thing I want to talk about, PyCharm. PyCharm is made by a company called JetBrains. JetBrains is a great company. They have lots of tools for software development. In fact, if you're a student, I highly recommend you go to JetBrains and get a student trial edition of their software, because they have software that's for all kinds of anything software development, they've got tools for. Let's go ahead and go to JetBrains. In fact, one of my favorite programs they have under the developer tools, if you're into C#, is this thing called ReSharper. This helps you write much cleaner code, right? It's listening every time you write anything in C#. ReSharper will analyze it and say, is there a more efficient way to write this? Is there a better way? And it keeps you it makes your code a lot cleaner and a lot easier to read and a lot more functional. They have a bunch of different IDEs for different platforms, and one of them is called PyCharm. This is really designed specifically for Python developers. So we'll go ahead and click PyCharm. And there's two versions, right? There's the Python is the IDE for professional developers. There's also a community edition. So when we get here, we go to the downloads section. There's the professional, or we can get the community edition. I gotta find, let's see if I can find that in, aha, community edition. You gotta scroll down. That's the trickiness with it, right? So they try to sell you the paid for version. They give you a free 30-day trial and want you to pay for it. But if you scroll down, there is the PyCharm Community Edition. For our class and for 99% of the stuff that you're going to do, even commercially, the Community Edition is all you really need. So you can download this one for free. It's built and it's open source, right? So it's a nice platform for developing, and that's actually what I use. So this is the Community Edition of PyCharm, and this is what I'm going to teach in class. So make sure you get this executable, not the paid-for version. Okay, so we make sure we choose the correct edition. We want to get the Community Edition, which is completely free. If, for instance, you want, maybe less than half of 1% of you might want the actual paid subscription for the professional edition, get some extra functionality, by all means, you can do that. Okay, we're going to download the installer, just like we did for Python, and run the installer. There's not much to it, right? You just click and go. We start the installation. There's some different options that you can click through, but it should be straightforward. Where am I installing it? Where's my Python? Is it in the path variable? All that kind of stuff. Then I want you to go ahead and launch PyCharm, just like I did right here, right? So click on the link, boot it up, and play around with this. Go to File, go down into Settings, spend 15-20 minutes reading through all the different settings. My favorite is to play around with is the appearance. I can change to a light background, and I can have white background with colored text, or I can go back and I can change it back to how I had it before. When I'm working on code for a long time, I like to have a dark background. So I'm going to change my appearance to be dark. I've also different settings in here on the editor. I can change font size. So for all of my programs, I change the font size to be readable for you all. But this is huge, right? You don't want to necessarily have font that big, so you can make your font smaller. But for video purposes, I like to keep it around 24-point font just so you can see my instructions. And it doesn't make it so big that it's crossing lines and things like that. So that's a good size font. Play around, spend 15-20 minutes, get it the way you want it configured. Again, if you break it, delete it and start over, right? Uninstall the application and reinstall it. It's not the end of the world. It's much better to be curious than worrying about trying to break stuff. If, for instance, you did download the professional version, you'd have to register it, but hopefully you just did the free community edition and you can skip this step. Okay, so now at this point, we've got Python installed, which has the idle development environment where I can write code there. That was limited, so we decided to install PyCharm. PyCharm gives us a lot more functionality. The next thing I want to install is called Anaconda. Anaconda is, oops, I don't want to run that, is a platform, cross-platform solution for Python as well. Let's go to Anaconda just so you can see what that looks like. Anaconda.org, and this is the web page. You'll see it's nothing to write home about. It's just a real simple web page, but you can get to the download link. So you'll go ahead and hit download Anaconda, and you'll see that it's free, right? So it's a free download, everything you need, and it's really designed for data scientists in mind, statisticians that want to run stats packages. In fact, when I was working on my dissertation, I downloaded Anaconda to do all of my data analytics, right? So Python has a standard install of like 25 megs. Let's go look at my download real quick. Where's my downloads? Here we go, my downloads. And you can see Python, let's make this smaller so you can see, is about 25 megs. I downloaded Anaconda earlier today, and you can see that it's almost a gigabyte in size. It comes with way more tools, way more functionality right out of the gate. So I highly recommend downloading Anaconda just because if you download that, you're going to have most of the packages you'll ever need. And so it's a free download for Windows, for Mac, and for Linux. And you can download that and then just click through the installer, straightforward, just like the other installers. You'll navigate to that download page. You'll choose the distribution you care about, which will be the free one that we just saw. We'll click the installer. We'll download the installer, run it, complete the installation, and verify it. So that's the standard steps for installing Anaconda, just like anything else. Let's take a look at it, though. Once it's installed, and we'll click Anaconda. And it does, because it's such a large install, it does take a while to load, and you'll see a couple pop-ups and things like that. We'll give it a minute here. And while we're doing that, does anybody know why Python is called Python? Why did Guaido call Python, or why did he give it the name that he gave it? Go ahead and look that up and just see if you can learn why he calls it Python. It's nothing to do with the snake. Yeah, Guaido was a huge Monty Python fan, so that was a fun movie to watch. If you haven't seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, highly recommend seeing it. It's a classic. It's a little bit goofy, so you gotta hopefully like goofy movies like I do, but we'll look at that later. But great movie, and that's really why we call Python Python, right? However, everybody capitalizes on the Python being a snake, and so that's why we get things like Anaconda, right? So it's related to a Python, but again, the irony is that the language Python has nothing to do with the snake. All right, so this is Anaconda on the navigator screen. You'll see that we got a couple of tabs over here. It's got environments and e-learning if I want to learn about Python. It's got a community if I want to build out and work with some other people that are in Python. This is a good place to build a community. But we're going to focus in the home section where we have the different applications that we can run with Python. See, I can launch Visual Studio Code out of here. I can, if I had PyCharm Professional, I could actually install that and launch that. But I'm going to focus on Jupyter Lab. So just go ahead and hit launch on Jupyter Lab. And that's what you're seeing on my screen here is Jupyter Lab. And I will share this notebook, which is IPYNB files, are IPython Jupyter Notebook files. And this will be available in your downloads section as well as wherever this video is located. And you can actually have this injected into your Jupyter Lab and follow along. All right, that's really all I want to get out of this section. So go ahead and take a break and come back, and when we get back, we'll talk about how do we write some code. We'll actually get hands-on keyboard with writing some basic syntax, create some variables, and store some different data types associated with Python. So see you all in a few minutes.